On today's episode of Uprising, what do you get when you combine atomic bombs, global power, and two fierce ideologies? You get the subject of today's show, the Cold War, and the battle over the mind held by the spy agencies, the CIA and the KGB, in their fights, especially over the drug LSD, and how the CIA in particular used it on a broad cross-section of American society to literally try and control people's minds. This is all, I feel like I'm Alex Jones saying this, but it is 100% real. It is the story of some pretty crazy experiments with the CIA that not a lot of people know about, and that's kind of the whole fun thing that I want to do about the show, is tell interesting things that are real and not a lot of people know about, and what the government did at various points in various times. So pretty much what I want to start off with this is we get to the beginning, the very, very beginning, which is the Cold War. Starting at the Cold War, it was August 30th, 1949. That was the time where things really got a bit problematic. This is time, early 1950s, we kind of get this. We really begin to understand when the Soviet Union, August 30th, 1949, gets this atomic bomb. We kind of really begin to understand that this is going to be the defining ideological struggle. And not just ideological, but all planes, all disciplines, everything that these two countries would have would be kind of really pushed at each other for who knows how long. It would be a really kind of a match to the death, and it was already beginning to build with the Russians now finally getting this atomic bomb, establishing themselves as a almost equivalent militarily superpower, at least at that time, is what people thought, to the United States, and they were really willing to go to great lengths and really in whichever way they could to protect that big advantage. And the way, really, this originally manifested himself was, of course, through things like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, all these proxy wars that we know so much about the Cold War, but it was a lot of stuff behind the scenes too. We had situations where, this is a crazy situation. For example, this is a story of a Bulgarian dissident, Georgi Markov. He was a Bulgarian dissident who had fled the country because he'd spoken out against the communist government, so he sought refuge in London. So one day he's there in London waiting on a bus, and a stranger passes by and accidentally pokes his leg with his umbrella. Only it wasn't a stranger, it was a Russian spy, and it wasn't an accident. It was a secret pricker poison gun. Stuff like this. Stuff that you see in these, Alex Rider, Jean Le Carré, rest in peace novels. All that stuff. That was based on some pretty, real things. If you heard that, you just come on. This is out of a novel. And a lot of that stuff really did, or very, very similar stuff. It was drawn on, based on, shall we say, real life events, right? So, that is what we see with this. Really just a time where there was this ever-encroaching threat from Russia. The Korean War goes by, and by the time you get to 1952, 1953, you're hearing about the Korean War kind of coming to a close, and all this disturbing stuff about how the threats of Soviet spies lurking everywhere, and even possibly, in one New York Times story, controlling people's minds. And what did one man need to do about it? Well, there was... we're just going to need to introduce this one key person in the story who would really be the one to change it all. Allen Dulles would be appointed to the CIA around this time by Dwight D. Eisenhower and would serve for many, many years under many, many presidents, pissing them off all at one point or another, but still reshaping the face of the earth and America's image and creating the modern order that we know today. He was quite a visionary figure and really one that not a lot of people know too much about. On April 10th, 1953, Allen Dulles, he was giving a speech, and he was talking to, of all people, Princeton. It was a gathering of his fellow Princeton Ivy League people, and they were talking a little bit about how in the global stage, things are getting a little bit disturbing with these kind of communist brainwashings that we hear about. So we had some GIs coming out confessing to war crimes. Like, who could possibly imagine that? U.S. troops committing war crimes at the orders of their superiors, and then their superiors coming out and denying it? Oh, no way. So some GIs were confessing to war crimes like carrying out germ warfare against communists, which is a charge that the U.S. categorically denied. Others were reportedly so brainwashed they refused to return to the United States at all and defected. As if that weren't enough, the U.S. were weeks away from secretly sponsoring their overthrow of a democratically elected leader in Iran. As really things, as you can imagine, for people like Alan Dulles, for people who are kind of at that nexus of intelligence and military power, things were getting a little bit stressful. Dulles had just become the first civilian director of an agency growing more powerful by the day, and the speech provided an early glimpse into his priorities for the CIA. In the past few years, we've been accustomed to hearing much about the battle for men's minds, the war of ideologies, he told the attendees. I wonder, however, whether we clearly perceive the magnitude of the problem, whether we realize how sinister the battle for men's minds has become in Soviet hands. We might call it, in this new form, brain warfare. Ooh. Dulles described the sinister Soviet brain perversion techniques as effective but abhorrent and nefarious. He gestured to American prisoners of war returning from Korea, shells of the men they once were, parroting communist propaganda they'd heard cycled for weeks on end. He expressed fears and uncertainty. Were they using chemical agents, hypnosis, or something else entirely? We in the West, the CIA director conceded, are somewhat handicapped in brain warfare. This sort of non-consensual experiment, even on one's enemies, was antithetical to American values, Dulles insisted, as well as antithetical to what should be human values. And of course, a lot of that probably was something that they didn't really know about yet, which was post-traumatic stress that those troops were probably having to a pretty large degree. But I'm sure there was, of course, some people who were influenced in some way by the Soviets. But the big thing here is Alan Dulles coming out taking a stand against psychological warfare and manipulation. Very, very clearly here, we love to see that. Fear of brainwashing and a new breed of brain warfare terrified and fascinated the American public throughout the 1950s. And really, this was the boom time for all things spy, all things thriller to go. And whether it be true or not true, or whether it be hype, or whether it be something closer to reality, like, they were all over the place. So GIs returning from China, North Korea, and the Soviet Union, really apparently brainwashed, spurred on by both the words of the KGB spies and getting under steep psychological torture. So all these sensational accounts in newspapers offered stories of new mind control techniques and technologies really no man could fully resist. It was very, very scaring. The paranoia began to drift in American culture with books like The Manchurian Candidate and Naked Lunch, playing on themes of unhinged scientists and vast political conspiracies. It was a very, very scary time. It was a very paranoid time, kind of similar to, I think, the way things are now. But the idea of brainwashing also provided many Americans with a compelling, almost comforting explanation for communism's swift rise, that Soviets used the tools of brainwashing on not just enemy combatants, but on their own people. Like, how else could anybody want to support communism, support the ideologies of the Soviets without some really twisted stuff going on? So American freedom versus the Soviet mind control became a dividing line as stark as the Iron Curtain. So 3 days after his speech decrying these Soviet tactics, Dulles approved the beginning of MKUltra, a top-secret CIA program for covert use of biological and chemical materials. American values are made for good rhetoric, but Dulles had far greater plans for the agency's Cold War agenda. So that brave stand against chemical warfare for Alan Dulles lasted all of about 3 days. MKUltra's mind control experiments generally centered on a little bit about how behavioral modification via electroshock therapy, hypnosis, polygraphs, radiation, a variety of drugs, toxins, and chemicals. These experiments relied on a range of test subjects, some who freely volunteered, some who volunteered under coercion, and some who had absolutely no idea they were involved in a sweeping defense research program. From mentally impaired boys at the state school to American soldiers to sexual psychopaths at a state hospital, MKUltra's programs often preyed on the most vulnerable people in society. The CIA considered prisoners especially good subjects because they were willing to give their consent in exchange for extra recreation time or commuted sentences. Whitey Bulger, a former organized crime boss, wrote of his experience as an inmate test subject in MKUltra, 8 convicts in a panic and paranoid state. Bulger said of the 1957 tests at the Atlanta Penitentiary, where he was serving time, total loss of appetite, hallucinating, the room would change shape, hours of paranoia, and feeling violent. We experienced whole periods of living nightmares, and even saw blood coming out of the walls, guys turning to skeletons in front of me. I saw a camera change into the head of the dog. I felt like I was going insane. So, as this is really what they did, just signing up for these prisoners. Some, of course, under coercion, some under for volunteers. People are just like, it really couldn't be something like as simple as someone just being like, "Hey, I want to come down to the store and try the new drug LSD to help out your country." It's really, really safe. Just the CIA just wants to see you and see how you react to it. If you'll be all right, and it's just be a great thing here to serve your country against the fight against these dirty red commies. All right, beautiful. Like that. That's pretty much what they had been doing. Bulger claimed he had been injected, of course, with LSD. That was the main drug that they used, lysergic acid diethylamide, as Kid Cudi so memorably said. Or acid has, of course, been one of CIA's key interests for this brain warfare program, as the agency theorized it could be useful in interrogations. They also really, the big thing was, in the grand goal, the grand dream, obviously, the CIA didn't really ever achieve, because it's pretty hard to do, just kind of a drug where the people who take it, they'll be told to do something and won't remember how or why they did it the next morning or 24 hours when the drug wears off. So one CIA officer described the agency as literally terrified of the Soviets' LSD program, largely because of the lack of knowledge about the drug in the United States. This is one material that we had ever been able to locate that really had potential fantastic possibilities if used wrongly. So they were just absolutely losing their minds over the insane possibilities and probabilities of things that could happen with this substance. With the advent of MKUltra, the government's interest in LSD shifted from a defensive to offensive orientation. They were really, at this time, kind of starting to see and begin to theorize how they could take control of this and use it for defense, and really to do some of the things that they believe the Soviets did to them to the Soviets. Like that was the belief there, that they thought they were going to be fighting this war, this new battle ideologically, that they didn't really know how long it was going to take on just completely different and new terrain. One big thing that no matter what happened, the CIA was absolutely sure everyone needed to know was that the American public did not need to know about the advent of this MKUltra project. Whatever they did with these people, and however much they could say time and time again it was for the interest of national security, how could the CIA possibly explain just putting LSD into random people unknowingly and just studying the facts like just nothing ever happened? It was pretty hard, and for that reason they decided to keep it secret. The CIA's initial experiments with LSD were fairly simple, if shockingly unethical. The agency generally dosed single targets, finding volunteers when they could, sometimes slipping the drug into drinks of fellow CIA employees. Over time, these LSD experiments really grew increasingly elaborate. Perhaps the most notorious of these projects was Operation Midnight Climax. On 225 Chestnut Street, San Francisco, the CIA was devoting substantial attention to decorating a bedroom. That bedroom was being decorated by George White. He wasn't really an interior decorator, as I'm sure you can imagine. He was an expert in narcotics. When the CIA moved into drug experiments, bringing White on board became a top priority. White hung pictures of French can-can dancers and flowers. He draped lush red bedroom curtains